The Objective News Network Presidential Candidate Profile. Robert F. Kennedy. Hello, everyone. This is the next in our series of profiles for candidates running in the 2024 presidential race. Today, we're going to talk briefly about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was born on January 17, 1954, to parents Senator Robert Kennedy and Ethel Kennedy. When Kennedy was 14, his father was assassinated while running for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1968. Kennedy graduated in 1976 from Harvard University and then studied at London's School of Economics, the University of Virginia School of Law, and Pace University. In 1985, he was admitted to the New York Bar, where he represented many environmentalist causes. He has 6 children from 2 previous marriages and 1 stepchild from his current marriage with actress Cheryl Hines. Kennedy was diagnosed in his 40s with something called spasmodic dysphonia, which is a neurological condition affecting the voice box that causes strained speech. On abortion, Kennedy has said that he supports a national ban on abortion after the first trimester. Kennedy's guiding principle on the economy is straightforward. Quote, people who work hard should be able to afford a decent life, close quote. He says that his priority will be to, quote, end corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is threatening now to impose a new kind of corporate feudalism on our country, close quote. In the area of foreign policy, in June 2023, Kennedy stated in broad terms that he believes that U.S. foreign relations should include significantly reducing U.S. military presence in other nations across the globe. On China, Kennedy says the United States and China are engaged in an arms race to develop what he described as ethnic bioweapons designed to attack and harm people of a specific race. He has said that despite the U.S. being a signatory to the Biological Weapons Convention, the Central Intelligence Agency has continued to undertake banned bioweapons research in secret. He has been widely criticized by the mainstream media, or not reported at all, for these statements, despite credible information coupled with multiple whistleblower claims and supporting evidence demonstrating that the CIA and other government agencies have violated the Biological Weapons Convention. On Israel and Gaza, Kennedy has criticized the Palestinian people, calling them, quote, arguably the most pampered people by international aid organizations in the history of the world, close quote. Meanwhile, his support for Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership earned him praise from rabbis and other prominent Jewish Americans across the country. On Ukraine and Russia, Kennedy argues that there are and were agreements between the United States and the Russian or Soviet leaders that NATO would not expand eastwards. He contends that the illegal invasion of Ukraine occurred because Russian security concerns were ignored by the United States and the Biden administration. But he has also remarked that Putin is a monster and also labeled the leader as a thug as well as a gangster. A quick look at the history books demonstrates, however, that Kennedy is correct. Such agreements between the United States and the former Soviet Union did exist, and the United States violated them by failing to live up to the promises it made. Again, on this issue, he has been widely criticized by the mainstream media. On the issue of health care coverage, Kennedy has stated that his, quote, highest ambition would be to have a single payer program, where people who want to have private programs can go ahead and do that, but to have a single program that is available to everybody. He opposes the prospect of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry and instead emphasizes the need to prevent regulatory capture. Regulatory capture is when regulators form close relationships with industries they are supposed to be regulating as a way to avoid being held properly accountable. Kennedy is the only candidate thus far to raise the failure of U.S. government regulatory agencies to hold U.S. companies accountable for violations of food, medical, banking, and environmental regulations. Kennedy has stated, quote, "I'm not going to take people's guns away, and I believe in gun control myself," close quote. He's explained his position, saying, I'm a constitutional absolutist. We can argue about whether the Second Amendment was intended to protect guns, but that argument has now been settled by the Supreme Court. Close quote. On LGBT issues, Kennedy has supported for many years the legalization of gay marriage. He has stated that transgender people also deserve respect, that he is opposed to mean-spirited legislation, and that he supports people's gender choices. However, he is against transgender women participating in women's sports. On vaccinations, Kennedy is an active person in the anti-vaccine movement. He has been widely criticized by the mainstream media because of his call for controlled studies of the long-term effects of vaccines, including COVID-19, and pointing to vaccination as a possible cause of autism in children. His stance on the possible long-term downsides of vaccination has been roundly criticized by the mainstream media. This is despite recent revelations regarding the efficacy and potential long-term adverse health effects of COVID-19 vaccines. On the issue of housing, Kennedy says that he wants to restore home ownership to tens of millions of Americans and lower costs for tens of millions more. He has said, quote, "We will get large corporations out of the single-family home business." At his website, he outlines a detailed plan for doing this. When it comes to the environment, Kennedy is pledged to fight regulatory capture and strengthen the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's oversight of industries that destroy the environment. Kennedy's guiding principle is that the government should operate for the people. On his webpage, Kennedy says, and I quote, "The intelligence agencies spy on our own people. Government tech platforms conspire to surveil and censor the public. Regulatory agencies have been captured by those they are supposed to regulate. Wall Street controls the Securities and Exchange Commission. Polluters and extractive industries dominate the Environmental Protection Agency and the Bureau of Land Management. Pharma controls the CDC, NIH, and the FDA. Big Ag controls USDA. Big Tech has captured the FTC. Kennedy's guiding principle on the weaponization of politics in America is heal the divide. Kennedy says there is a need for a broad popular movement that unites left and right, black and white, urban and rural, young and old, and working people of all ethnicities. On the issue of a peaceful world, Kennedy says, quote, "We will bring the troops home. We will stop racking up unpayable debt to fight one war after another. the military will return to its proper role of defending our country. As president, Kennedy says that he is going to end the humanitarian crisis at the southern border, starting with its most immediate cause, and that is an uncontrolled border. As he seals the border to illegal immigration, he says, his administration will enact a deeper reform to stem illegal migration in the long term while expanding lawful, orderly immigration according to the principles of justice and fairness. Another one of Kennedy's guiding principles is restore our rights. Quote, our administration will make it a top priority to protect and restore the fundamental civil liberties enshrined in the Bill of Rights that hold the essence of what America can be. These liberties have endured constant assault for more than 20 years, starting with the Bush-Cheney War on Terror and accelerating in the area of COVID-19 lockdowns, close quote. Another Kennedy principle is racial healing. On its website, Kennedy says, quote, nearly 60 years after the Civil Rights Act, the condition of black people in America is better in many respects. However, in terms of income, wealth, education, infant mortality, home ownership, incarceration, health care, and life expectancy, they still lag behind the rest of the population. With respect to Native Americans, Kennedy says this, under a Kennedy administration, historic wrongs done to Native Americans will be addressed and made right. Another guiding principle is the revitalization of America. The time has come, according to Kennedy, to reverse America's economic decline, decades in the making. Our country faces a widening wealth gap, the most unequal since the 1920s. Rampant debt, decaying infrastructure, and a hollowed-out industrial base. Every night, tens of millions of American children go to bed hungry, close quote. He says, quote, government assistance to the nation's most vulnerable is a high priority, but even more important is to remove the policies that have led to such poverty in the first place. Again, we refer you to Kennedy's website, an excellent description of what he would specifically do. Mr. Kennedy says that he understands veterans' acute awareness of the true nature, enormous cost, and sacrifice, along with the folly of America's engagements in conflicts overseas. He says, quote, veterans deserve recognition for their remarkable service. More importantly, they deserve a special voice in our democracy's councils of war and peace and in reuniting our country around shared purposes. On the issue of higher education in America, he says, and again I'm going to quote right from his website, in 1940, about 4 million Americans held four-year college degrees. Today, it's over 100 million, tenfold increase relative to total population. Some 17% of hotel clerks and 23.5% of amusement park attendants hold a four-year degree. The result of herding masses of students through an educational model originally designed to train only scholars and intellectuals has not been to raise a nation of scholars, but rather to debase the quality of education. This is the phenomena of degree inflation, close quote. Ladies and gentlemen, by far, this is the most interesting profile we have done in this series so far. Mr. Kennedy is the only candidate we have reviewed so far that goes beyond bullet lists to explain his position on many of the issues in terms of the principles he stands for. The coverage of areas and how he proposes to implement them at his website are quite impressive. Like all of the other candidates, however, that we have reviewed, Mr. Kennedy does not explain how he intends to address the ballooning national debt, upon which everything he proposes to accomplish as president depends. Like all of the other candidates, he appears willing to kick the can down the road rather than squarely address the issue. Solutions to the national debt crisis are essential to the long-term viability of programs like Social Security, healthcare, infrastructure development, and so much more. Finally, the most distinct discriminator of this candidate are the attacks he suffers and repeated attacks from the mainstream media. Too often, the mainstream media chooses to criticize Kennedy based on a false narrative to intentionally introduce bias. In many respects, it appears that Mr. Kennedy may have committed truth in an environment where truth is no longer allowed. It is what it is. This is John Hnatio reporting for the Objective News Network. Thank you so much for watching. Please tell your friends and colleagues about us, and please subscribe. We'll see you the next time.